At 0614 local time, a Ukrainian Luty drone pushed through the morning fog above the pine forests of Leningrad, skimming treetops on its way toward a distant target. It had been in the air for hours, launched from over 1,000 kilometers away, with others of its kind moving somewhere in loose formation behind it. What the swarm didn't know was that it had just flown into the densest electronic warfare envelope in Western Russia. Every GPS satellite feeding the machine guidance data was now transmitting lies, warping its sense of location toward a place it had never actually existed. The navigation system insisted it was drifting out across open sea. By every measure the Russians had written into their playbooks, this drone should have already been sitting dead in some field, nose buried and power cut. It wasn't. Inside the lead machine's navigation brain, the position reading jumped, smeared sideways, and began walking toward the Gulf of Finland, water the drone had never seen and was never meant to cross. The autopilot latched onto this phantom location and started nudging the nose toward an ocean that didn't exist, ready to fly the whole machine into the depths on nothing but a single false signal. Most days, that's where the story ends. The drone drowns and no one hears it. This one held steady anyway. The nudge arrived and it refused to take it. Whatever was broadcasting those false numbers hadn't figured out the drone had stopped listening. Here's what was really happening. That sabotage goes by the name GPS spoofing, and you're watching it happen live. Real satellites orbit 20,000 kilometers up, and their signal reaches Earth about as weak as a car's headlight seen from across an ocean. A spoofer sitting on the ground doesn't bother with finesse. It simply shouts louder, blasting the airwaves with counterfeit satellite signals powerful enough to drown out the real thing. A receiver built to trust the strongest, clearest signal swallows the deception whole. And a drone, trusting its own instruments, flies itself straight into the sea. A skilled spoofer can shift position by 50 meters or far more, or conjure an entirely fabricated location and persuade the autopilot to navigate toward it. Imagine someone swapping every street sign in a city while you drive. Your engine runs fine, your steering works fine, but every turn you make follows signs that are lying straight to your face. 40 kilometers away, a Russian electronic warfare operator sat watching his display with the relaxed confidence of someone who'd done this work 100 times before. He'd sent dozens of these machines into the ground without firing a shot. No missile, no cannon fire, no sound whatsoever, just the lie whispered into a cheap receiver. It rode that fiction until the drone flew itself somewhere absurd and ran out of altitude over an empty field. The best intercept, in his view, was one where nothing exploded at all. He leaned back, his chair creaking beneath him, coffee cold and forgotten at his elbow, and marked the contact as gone. Another routine one on a morning full of them. Honestly, it might be the easiest job in the Russian military, like getting paid to change the Wi-Fi password on your neighbor's router. In Leningrad, someone had built a $10 million machine specifically designed to stop a drone that cost roughly $200,000. A Manhattan parking spot with wings. The parking spot was winning. The lead drone had stopped trusting its GPS the moment those numbers stopped adding up. The spoofer operator would never know that the drone's computer had been running two navigation systems in parallel the entire journey, cross-checking their stories, and the two had just started to disagree. So the computer dumped the satellite data, ignored the phantom pulling it toward water, dropped its nose toward the trees, and began verifying itself against the actual ground below. That backup is inertial navigation, gyroscopes and accelerometers that sense every turn and gust and tally it all up without asking anything from the outside world. It's the oldest trick in navigation. You're counting your own steps down a pitch-black hallway, knowing where the kitchen is because you memorized the house. Nobody can jam it. There's nothing to jam. Its single weakness is drift. Over 1,000 kilometers, tiny inertial errors pile up into real distance, and the drone gradually loses its precise location. That very drift is why it had to descend low and start reading the ground. And that one decision shaped everything that followed. Reading terrain meant flying down in the weeds. It solved the navigation problem neatly, but it also pulled the drone out of the high, efficient air where it sipped fuel. Down here, the engine drank hard. The fuel reserve it had carried all the way from Ukraine started to shrink. And flying low was exactly where every short-range air defense system around that port was positioned and waiting. It had beaten the lie by getting close to the ground. The trouble is, what was living down there? If that outer ring held, the swarm never reached the coast, and the entire raid ended at the fence. A radar on the port's outer perimeter picked up a contact at 6 kilometers and locked on. And a missile climbed off a launch rail with a scream. It shredded a drone 2 slots away from the leader into a slow cloud of fiberglass fragments drifting across the rail yard. What he was operating was a Pantsir S-1, radar, missiles, and a pair of 30mm autocannons welded onto a single truck chassis. On paper, it shreds drones for breakfast. The Pantsir S-1 is Russia's point defense workhorse. 12 ready missiles per vehicle, autocannon that hose 5,000 rounds a minute, and interceptors that hunt a target out to 20 kilometers, roughly Midtown to JFK, at better than 3 times the speed of sound. The world's most expensive drone swatter right up until the ammunition runs dry. This wasn't paper. Ukraine spent 2 years destroying these things, and about half of what Russia started the war with is scrap metal now, a scorched mark on some satellite image. The factories can't keep pace, a handful monthly against a fleet getting torn apart. So the crews with a working one ration their missiles like a man counting his last bullets during a siege. You don't waste one. You can't. The autocannon fires dumb steel rounds. No computer tells the shell to burst into shrapnel near something small. A near miss counts for nothing. The whole rig is a TV remote, with 3 working buttons duct-taped to a second remote that only changes the channel if you jam it right against the screen. Out on the perimeter, the Pantsir commander stared at his scope and ran through the math nobody on his crew wanted to speak out loud. More contacts crawling across it than he had ready missiles to spend. He could see the gap plainly, like a bill he couldn't afford to pay. Every shot destroyed a real drone. His crew worked with precision and speed the way they'd trained, and none of it mattered. The lead drone out ahead of the first wave faced the hardest choice of its entire run. Because leading meant being spotted first and shot at first, the worst seat in the house. And the safe move was obvious. Fall back into the pack. Let the others draw the fire. Live easier. But sliding back came with a price, because arriving late meant the early waves would already have the target burning, smoke climbing, and cameras moving on. The whole reason this drone existed was to arrive early, so it held its position. It took its first shot risk and stayed at the tip of the spear. What kept it breathing in that spot wasn't armor or speed. It was simple math. The commander fired again. Another drone burst over the rail yard, and then 2 more slipped past the edge of his coverage untouched, flying on toward the coast while he was still tracking the first. The rack was emptying faster than the sky was filling. Look at that wave spreading across his radar. This is saturation warfare. It's why cheap drones beat expensive air defenses in the first place. A Pantsir can really only track and engage one thing at a time, and it carries only so many missiles on those rails. Salt the swarm with decoys, cheap hollow shells that light up a radar scope exactly like the real thing, and the gunner can't tell which one carries the warhead from which is just junk until it's far too late. Every missile burned on a maybe decoy is one that won't exist when the real one finally arrives. Think of one bouncer at a door with a dozen people rushing him. He grabs a few, the rest walk past, and the drone he's chasing costs about $200,000. His launcher holds 12 missiles. Ukraine builds the drones by the hundreds. He runs out of ammunition long before Ukraine runs out of drones. That's the first reason the wall collapsed. Here's the second. Some of the systems that should have been defending this port weren't there at all. They'd been airlifted onto rooftops 400 meters away in Moscow because command got nervous about their own skyline and yanked the hardware home to sit on apartment blocks. Like pulling the smoke detectors out of the kitchen to mount them in the living room, then acting stunned when dinner catches fire. A wall is only as thick as the brick still standing in it. A lot of this one was missing. So the arithmetic broke the way the commander knew it would. He emptied his ready rack into the wave, dropped the drones he could, and bought himself a reload window. Those long, painful seconds while the launcher pushes fresh missiles onto the rails and the sky goes wide open. The lead drone drove straight through the gap and came out alive. One reason, it stayed first, and the swarm behind it soaked up the shots meant for everyone. It fought through by leading from the front. Then it heard the rotors. On the inner perimeter, a gun turret swung hard and poured tracers into the sky. A low-flying drone in the wave burst into sparks, barely a kilometer from the perimeter fence. That was the Zaul-30 Citadel, a boxy automated 30mm gun module Russia only started installing onto defense lines this year. The Citadel is Russia's response to Germany's Skynex, a radar and optics turret that fires programmable airburst shells, rounds it commands to detonate into shrapnel next to a drone. No direct impact needed, out to roughly a mile. A robot machine gun nest with a brain, basically. And here's what it really signals, is bolting gun defenses, because it already lost this fight at the missile layer. The Pantsir seen a minute back wasn't a strong defense failing. It was a broken one improvising. They pushed it into service for one stark reason. The Pantsir couldn't cover the volume anymore. So somebody decided a robot gun was better than nothing. Think of it as a Ring doorbell camera that shoots back. It sees you. A guy pulls a trigger from somewhere out of harm's way, and inside a click and a half, it'll shred a drone into pieces. To be frank, this is starting to look like desperation wearing the mask of innovation. The lead drone tested just how good this better option really was. The lead drone never flew close enough to find out. It banked wide and slipped past the gun's engagement range, and that one turn exposed the flaw. A gun module that only reaches 1.5 kilometers can't touch a drone clever enough to navigate around it. Going the long way wasn't free. Routing wide added distance, and flying low to stay hidden added drag on a drone that had already traveled more than 1,000 kilometers. Every extra kilometer it flew to dodge the guns came straight from the reserve it had been hoarding since Ukraine started. By the time it cleared the bubble and swung back toward the water, it had locked into something it couldn't reverse. One pass, no fuel to come back around again, and no fuel to climb and hold for a better shot. Burn the last of the fuel on a failed pass, and the drone never reaches the tanker. So whatever happened at that farm happened on the first try or not at all. The guns didn't kill the drone. They killed its second chance. And out there, 1,000 kilometers deep, a second chance was the only thing that could have saved it. That mattered more. One cannon burst through the wing, or the warhead, and the drone scattered in the air. 1,000 kilometers of flight erased in a second. Then, from above and behind, a line of tracers walked across the sky and tore another drone out of the formation. Meet the Ka-52M Alligator, Russia's solution when the ground defenses kept falling short. It's Russia's most advanced attack helicopter. Coaxial rotor system rated to 300 kilometers per hour, armed with a 30mm 2A42 autocannon and up to 12 air-to-air missiles. Price tag, $16 million per airframe. It was designed to destroy NATO armor on the German plains. Today, it was hunting something with the wingspan of a hang glider. A sharp crew can drop several drones in one mission with nothing but the cannon. And it's the one thing up there fast enough to catch a leaker. Russia's even claims it's feeding those guns new airburst rounds now. Shells that burst into shrapnel in flight. Maybe it is, but nobody outside Russia has verified those rounds actually work. Here's the problem. The gun camera footage gives the rest of us a low-resolution picture that washes out wide beneath the cannon's own muzzle flash and freezes at the worst moments. Hunting a single small drone low against broken forest through a sensor like that is like spotting one moth against a cluttered yard through a fogged phone camera in bright noon sun. And every hour that helicopter, worth more than the whole swarm it's hunting, burns fuel chasing $50,000 drones somewhere in Kyiv, an accountant somewhere is smiling. Now the lead drone faced the last clear decision of its flight. And like every choice before it, both roads were bad. Climb for a steadier run, and its camera would get a perfect look at the target, while painting its outline against open sky for that cannon. Or drop into the ground clutter below the helicopter, where it would survive, but where its camera would judder through a low, fast pass at the edge of what its little brain could handle. It chose, as it always had, to live. High above, the gunner caught one clean and watched it tumble. He swung his sight onto the next contact, the leader, and lost it. His screen washed wide and stuttered, and his eyes burned from an hour of chasing small shapes against broken ground. He refused to accept defeat. He was dangerous, and he was good. It didn't help. The one drone that mattered slid underneath him through the noise, and he never saw it. That miss is the whole story of the Ka-52M's weakness. The footage washes out, the feed stutters, and the thing it's hunting has the wingspan of a small aircraft painted to hide against the sky and flying at terrain level. By the time the gunner blinked, his target was already gone, dropping toward the port. The lead drone slipped beneath the helicopter and locked onto the port. 2 minutes to impact. 120 seconds of fuel, altitude, and luck. Low and fast, its camera straining at the edge of what it could process, and the tank farm ahead was vanishing behind a growing curtain of its own black smoke. The drone dropped toward the tank farm and flew straight into two problems no warhead could overcome. The first was a lattice of steel cables stretched over the tanks like a spider web. Beyond it rolled a wall of black smoke, already boiling off the far end of the farm, where an earlier drone had split a tank open minutes before. That mesh over the tanks isn't concealment, it's a net, and the drone was locked into flying straight at it. We'll return to how a steel web ended up strung all over a fuel farm. Right now, the machine was deep into its final 2 minutes, flying the last stretch with no operator, no radio, no GPS. It wasn't broadcasting or saying anything the Russians could intercept. The whole machine was barely the size of a hang glider, cobbled from hobby plane parts for pennies next to a cruise missile. What was flying in it? The Luty, Ukraine's homemade long-range attack drone. A wingspan close to 7 meters, a piston engine ripped from a hobby plane, and a 50-kilogram warhead in the nose. It had traveled more than 1,000 kilometers to arrive here. On a one-way trip, it was steering by eye, a single camera in the nose, and that eye was running out of things it recognized. Lose the lock now, this close, and the drone flew blind into a wall of smoke and hit nothing at all. The smoke rolled across the camera's view, and the image stopped matching where the memory held tiny rows of silver tanks. The lens now showed a churning black column, shot through with fire. The software hunted for a landmark it had been promised. It found smoke. The lock broke for one beat. The smartest thing on that drone had no idea where it was. Here's what failed. This is machine vision guidance. The drone flies by eye. A camera in the nose watches what it sees against satellite images somebody loaded into its memory before takeoff, and steers itself the rest of the way in. There was nothing for the spoofer to deceive because the drone had stopped asking the satellites anything at all. Picture a tourist who memorized a photo of the building before leaving the hotel. Scramble every GPS signal in the city, and that tourist still walks to the front door. The catch is easy. The tourist has to recognize the door. Right now, the door it had memorized was buried in smoke. This was the price coming due for all of it. 3 ways forward, all of them closed. Climb above the smoke and hand itself to the guns. Orbit and wait on fuel it didn't have. Or find the target through the chaos and commit. 2 doors nailed shut, 1 barely cracked open. So the computer did the only thing left. It stopped hunting for the whole picture and hunted for hard edges instead. The rim of a single tank breaking through the top of the smoke. The straight line of the pier behind it. Anything solid enough to anchor on. It found a tank rim cutting the smoke line. It locked. The range counter kept falling. Down on the fence line, one of those Zao 30 gun modules caught the drone in its sight through a gap in the smoke and opened fire, walking 30mm rounds up toward it from behind. The net waited below. The smoke churned ahead, and the tracer climbed in from the rear. 3 threats, 1 3-second window. From the far end of the farm, the engine note dropped low enough to rattle the chain-link fence. A flat, buzzing pressure rolling across the empty yard. The drone overhead had already locked onto the tank rim. The camera held on the rim. The drone steadied, and the nose dropped, threading the gap in the steel web like a needle finding its own eye. Then the warhead punched through and buried itself in the side of a product's tank. Look closely at the weapon that pierced that tank wall. The warhead steel case is scored on the inside, so when it detonates, the metal shatters into a dense storm of fragments instead of one jagged lump. It's crude and it's vicious against a thin tank wall full of fuel. That fragment storm rips the steel open and ignites the vapor in the same instant. So the blast just has to kick the door. The tank erupted. The heat lit the fence line. A half-second later, a hard wave of it you'd feel on your face from a block away. Flames sheeted across the top and found the next tank, then the one past that. A fresh black column erupted over the Bolshoi port and punched into the sky beside the one already standing there. 2 pillars now. Then a third somewhere across the harbor, where another drone in the wave had found its own tank. 3 columns of smoke standing over the city, where Russia had promised the world there'd be none. Now take in the whole scene. There's the smoke itself, standing tall over the waterfront for everyone in the city to see. And 10 miles inland, lit up and packed with people, sits the reason any of this happened. The St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, Russia's own Davos. The Kremlin's yearly gathering to tell the world the sanctions never hurt. The stage where on Friday, Vladimir Putin would stand in front of a Saudi delegation and thousands of foreign investors and speak about Russian strength, Russian stability, Russian normalcy. The smoke would tell a different story. A black column on the skyline that no camera in that city could crop out, standing behind every shot of a speech about how everything is fine.